morning, everyone. Today is September 28th, 2023, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. As many of you know, there's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And our audiences have been so very generous in donating in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts of the webinar each week is when we announce the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
With honor, Jeff, I will do so. Today we're up to $446,427.78 in donations, about which we have been told. So you know it's more than that. Fantastic. I think that today we'll pass the 450 mark, and $500,000 is just a blink away, right? Thanks so much for your generosity.
Thank you, Jean, and thanks to everyone. And perhaps Dwight Golann, today's guest, will become the answer to a great trivia question. Who was the speaker who put the Will Work for Food project, New Possibilities Hour, over the $450,000 mark? Speaking of Dwight Golann, we're very much looking forward to his presentation. Dwight is research professor at Suffolk University and the University of California Law, San Francisco. He is the author of the ABA's leading books on mediation, Mediating Legal Disputes, and Mediation Advocacy, Sharing a Mediator's Powers, as well as many law texts and articles. He has trained mediators for courts, bar associations, the Federal Judicial Center, the European Union, and ADR organizations on 5 continents. He is also an active mediator who has helped parties resolve hundreds of real-life legal disputes. Dwight has received the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American College of Civil Mediators and the American Bar Association's 2021 Award for Outstanding Scholarship in Dispute Resolution. He is also an honorary member of the International Academy of Mediators. At UC Law, he is involved in developing an online mediation course for professionals in developing countries and teaches in the law school's program in
say that dinner is not appropriate.
Now, we hope that if you're able to, you can contribute to the Boston Food Bank in honor of Dwight's presentation. The Boston Food Bank is one of the leading food depositories in the Boston area where Dwight lives and where I spent some time many years back. It's a wonderful cause, and we appreciate your designating that, Dwight, as a place we know that many, many people will contribute. With that, my friend, we're very much looking forward to hearing your presentation on the role of loss in mediation. The floor is yours.
Okay. I should add to the bio that in addition to resolving many disputes, I sometimes don't resolve disputes. And this week, for example, I'm stuck with one where the company isn't going to go above 5 figures and the town is not going to go below 7 figures. And I can't quite figure out what to do about it. When I've thought about the cases, and we rarely talk about the cases that don't settle, the mistakes, whatever, the thing that comes through to me, I realized, is the great theme of modern dispute resolution has been interest-based bargaining. The idea that, of course, you can create value, and you can by talking about things other than money. It's true. I guess I have decided that most of the time in my mediations, despite my best efforts, in one way or another, people, at least one of them, feels like they're losing. And this idea of loss, I think, is the biggest single reason, at least my mediation efforts fail. You'll get a chance to talk to see if that's true for you as well. So let me think about it, because it led me to look at what psychologists from Freud on have said about loss, and thought about how that I see that coming up in mediation at a couple of deeper levels than I've thought before. Let me begin. How do people decide that they're losing? It has to be, they have to have some internal benchmark. And what could the benchmarks be? Negotiation theory would say, well, you should settle whenever your offer is better than your best alternative. Okay. But in that sense, no one ever loses, in the sense that no one ever settles unless they think what they're getting is better than their alternative. And yet clearly that doesn't do it. So then the next question is, maybe it's compared to the status quo ante, whatever they had or were before the accident, before the contract breach, before the breach of trust, whatever it is. If that's true, then I've got to bring them back to where they were before it all blew up. And if they've spent money on lawyers, which they always have, and gone through personal aggravation, travail, business problems, I got to somehow invent enough to get that back too. I'm just not good enough. I mean, maybe people can do that, but I can't. So the third possibility is that they have a benchmark right in their head. They've worked out with their lawyer about what they ought to get. And if they can get there, even if it isn't where they were, they're more or less content. And when that works, it's great. So often, though, and I think for you as for me, people have formed ideas. They've seen it on the internet, in the chat room, wherever it is, that somehow their case is stronger, better, more valuable. And sometimes I engage in what I call self-anchoring, which is when the plaintiff starts out at $1 zillion and the defendant starts out at 10,000, one's left that they both convince themselves after a while that that's the right place to be. We know about anchoring. Self-anchoring is also a problem. So what does this produce in terms of feelings? There are all kinds of ways of thinking about feelings. I find useful Dan Shapiro and Roger Fisher's book Beyond Reason that talks about 5 core concerns. And if I can see if I can put up in share screen and skip over this initial PowerPoint. Okay, so human beings, they say, have a need for appreciation, meaning people like and value what we do. Affiliation, we're a tribal species. We feel connected to other people, and when we lose that connection through a dispute, that's a loss. Autonomy, we kind of want to control the environment around us. So if we can't control it, either because of what's happened or because of the court system, that's a loss. Human beings like status, right? We'd like to be at least in the middle, though obviously not everybody can be at average or above. And we also want a role, something useful that we're doing. I think this one may be more American than it is in some other cultures, but for Americans at least, it seems important. There is a level beyond that, which was introduced to me by the book, I'm sure many of you know, and I recognize some names here, Difficult Conversations. And they introduced me, at least, to the idea that it's more than losing money. They can feel the loss of a core identity. I'm a competent employee. I'm a good parent. I'm an ethical boss. And for me, at least, I've noticed it myself, the impact is like hitting a raw nerve in the tooth with no Novocaine. You react extensively. In fact, we call it kind of an identity quake. So that's a level of feelings that go beyond pure unhappiness, I guess I'll call it. So with that, let me introduce you to a little dispute, not a little dispute, it was an actual dispute. And I'd like to show you a bit of video. So the dispute, MedPro, a US company, gives Mumbai partners in India an exclusive contract to distribute medical instruments. This is a big deal for Mumbai because they've been doing bandages and so on, now high tech. 5 years, they spent 500,000, they build the market to 800,000 a year. Then, for whatever reason, sales drop 25%. MedPro terminates them on 45 days notice for cause. They have a contract written by American lawyers that allows termination for cause or on 90 days notice with no cause. A few days later, the chief salesman from Mumbai resigns and then gets a distributorship from MedPro. And Mumbai sues MedPro in India and in the United States for breach of contract, interference with advantageous relations, sort of conspiracy, you could almost say. So that's the situation. I think that's all you really need to know about it. Now let me show you just a bit of video, which is a video of me meeting with the two sides. Met first with the plaintiff and then the defendant. So here is a meeting with the CEO of Mumbai and her lawyer.
Start to get a feel for how Mumbai sees this problem and what's happened.
And we put a lot of time and energy, a lot of resources, and essentially paved the way for them in India. What we're really after here is some justice.
Well, I got the sense, we talked last week a bit about this, that this was a contract you spent a good deal of time in development costs and activities, and then it's really as it began to take off from your perspective, suddenly it was ended.
Well,
and I'm not sure I understand a great deal about the context, but that's really what I need to learn about.
Perhaps Ms. Gandhi could speak to that better.
Yeah, I mean, basically we negotiated a contract for a very long-term deal. I mean, it was an exclusive contract. And so the idea was that we were going to be the exclusive distributor of this oximeter in India. That was the idea from the beginning. And I mean, I don't know what happened with the paperwork because, you know, basically we were in the room to discuss, okay, whether our company could meet the needs of MedPro in India, and we decided we could because we had the relationships with the bureaucracy. And I mean, I don't know how much you know about business in India, but it's really quite a different thing. I mean, everybody in India is using all kinds of outdated equipment and they don't really care. They don't really understand why they should use this. So basically we had to convince them that this is money which is worth spending. Basically, I feel that they came, and as soon as we were starting to make profit for them, they took Chatwa from us, and then they terminated our contract.
Chatwa is the person
That was
who
the employee, yeah. That was our employee. He was our top salesperson, that's right.
The subtext of all this, and really it's important to understanding the problem here, is that there was some collusion going on here.
So you see this as an intentional violation of the contract as opposed to a misunderstanding or things not turning out as you hoped?
I mean, yes, I would say yes.
And your sense is that MedPro knew this was happening and was at least content with it. It sounds like an awful situation given the years of work that you had put into this.
I feel that MedPro's part in that needs to be, they need to understand they can't just do things like that.
So help me understand, when Mr. Chatwa left, what has happened since then?
I'm going to stop just in the interest of doing other things and a chance to hear from you. She goes on to talk about the embarrassment of not having supplies and she can't fulfill her contracts and so on. So I guess the question is, in terms of the 5 things that I said, at least in an American context, might generate emotion: lack of appreciation, lack of autonomy, lack of affiliation, injury to status, no role. What's going on with her? Just based on the first 2 minutes or so. Anybody? Just curious, what do you hear in this disputant's voice as she talks about it?
Appreciation.
I'm sorry?
Appreciation.
Appreciation.
Appreciation, lack of appreciation for all that she's done to build this store. Okay, so appreciation is one thing she's lost. Anything else?
Yes, stab in the back. Stab in the back. She feels been cheated.
Stab in the back.
Yeah.
Stab in the back.
Yeah.
She's been, so that's goes to affiliation. You know, she's been essentially thrown under the bus, so to speak, as we Americans would say.
She's embarrassed. She's been undercut.
Embarrassed, undercut,
Betrayed.
betrayed,
Hurt a little.
lost
Autonomy.
status. Sorry,
Yeah, autonomy, yeah. Not,
autonomy.
I
She's,
think that kind of goes with the control. I can't do this.
yeah. And she's wrapped up in this legal system that, excuse me, is costing her an arm and a leg in the United States. It has other advantages, but still, all this is going on. So you could understand why she would be feeling she's losing. I could put on the vice president of MedPro who would explain why he feels like, you know, they just failed. They're jerking us around, they're holding us up, et cetera, but let's not. Okay, so now I'm a professor. I want to administer a little quiz. The quiz is this. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to present a situation. I'm going to give you two choices, A and B, and I'm just going to ask for a show of hands. I don't mean the ones you put up on the screen. I mean, just raise your hand like this if you agree with either A or B, okay? So here is the situation. You've got a business, and the business has, hold on just a sec. You get it up. Okay, you got a business, 6,000 employees. It has 3 plants. It's in financial difficulty. So it's going to make some decisions, difficult decisions. And I'm going to give you option A, option B, and then I'd like to see how many people favor A, how many people favor B. Just raise your hand. All right, A. This plan will save 1 of 3 manufacturing plants and protect 2,000 jobs. B. This plan has a 1/3 probability of saving all plants, but a 2/3 probability of losing all plants and losing all jobs. So as between A and B, I'm going to put back on main screen. How many people would favor A? Just show of hands. How many people favor B? Okay, A wins decisively. Let me do 2 more and we're done. Okay. Option C, this plan will result in the loss of 2 out of the 3 manufacturing plants and losing 4,000 jobs. D, this plan has a 2/3 probability of resulting in the loss of all 3 plants and 6,000 jobs, but has a 1/3 probability of saving all plants and saving all jobs. So C and D, show of hands, how many would go for C? How many would go for D? Okay. So A wins decisively and C loses. So then the question is, what's the difference? Let me go back. What's the difference between A and C?
No difference.
The choice of wording,
No,
this plan will save.
What about the choice of wording?
no, there's no difference.
Well,
No,
there is a
I
difference
mean,
though.
will lose as opposed to will keep. It says
It's
will
the
lose.
same numbers,
Yeah.
but different words. We mediators know words matter. And what's happening is you're seeing the word loss and
Right.
seeing the word save. And you react to every group, including me. I don't give any tests. I haven't personally failed. So, you know, what's going on? I mean, this is hypothetical, right? You haven't lost anything. No one has lost anything. I said it was a hypothetical. And yet just the word loss versus saving makes a difference. You've experienced just a hypothetical form of what I think drives enormous amounts of decision making, which is loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, you know, biggest reason. And hold on. The finding in Stanford researchers, people take unreasonable risks and bear great pain to avoid what they see as a loss. A money loss, especially one seen as unfair, they call it an enhanced loss, it has about a 4-to-1 ratio compared to gaining the same amount of money. Losing $10 you don't expect to lose feels like losing 25 if it's unfair. Finding $10 on the sidewalk, $7.50. It's about the way they put it. So to me, avoiding a loss is actually much more important than obtaining a win, though I'd love wins when I can get them. And to me, parties feeling they're going to lose too much by settling is the most significant reason that mediations fail. So let me give you a couple other things, and then I'd like you to talk a little bit among yourselves. So can good bargaining techniques avoid loss? You know, the whole revolution led by Getting to Yes. Well, I reread Getting to Yes to see what they had to say about this. And here's their advice. You can choose to look forward or look backward. Instead of arguing with the other side about the past, talk about what you want to have happen in the future. That's their prescription. Problem is, that requires you to ignore what you've lost and focus on the future. There's some validity to that, and I do it, but the idea that Getting to Yes has techniques to wipe out loss, no, this is what they suggest. The other possibility is if you can repair the relationship that people have, that may reduce feelings of loss. So how often do legal mediations result in repairs of relationships? About 25 years ago, when I was a visiting scholar at the program on negotiation at Harvard, I kept hearing people talk about the ability of mediation to restore and repair relationships. And I kept feeling bad because it wasn't happening in my cases. I thought I must either be a bad mediator or something else is going on. And I realized what was going on was no one had ever checked. No, there were no empirical studies about whether this actually happened. So I decided to do my own little empirical study. And here's what I found. First, I talked and asked groups of mediators one by one, what are the last two cases that you had where there was a serious relationship and not divorce, not collective bargaining, but any other kind, property, contractual, employment, and so on. So here are the commercial mediators. Out of 30 cases, a quarter of them almost, they thought the parties had repaired their relationship. In 53%, there was a settlement, and there might often was some kind of integrative term, interest-based term, but not a repair. About 25% were pure money, and about 25 were impasse. I thought, well, these are cynical people. I need to talk to the old SPIDER, now Association of Conflict Management. So I talked to, let's see, 10 SPIDER leaders in New England, and here's what I got from them. Worse results, actually. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll go to the Middlesex Multi-Door Courthouse, Frank Sanders' invention. Now, there are reasons why court-referred cases, it's much harder to repair relationships. We can go into those, but here's what I got. So overall, 1 in 6 cases. Maybe in commercial, 1 in 4, although that strikes me as high for me anyway. And almost all of those cases, when I drilled down, were situations where the parties could not afford to repair their relationships. That is, it was just too expensive. I'm sorry, to end the relationship. It was too expensive to buy out the franchisee, to move so you didn't have the neighbor, to whatever it is. Well, there we are.
Yeah.
So, folks, I'm just curious, a couple of examples of either loss or gain that you see in your practice? Anyone offer, or what you heard about as you talked with others?
I
Any
was just
example?
going to say that hello from London, England. What I do focus on quite a lot is that endings are beginnings. The ending of dispute is the beginning of something authentic, real, new, the future. You know, if we could settle this, then you can get on to the next stage. And that seems to be quite helpful sometimes. Whatever the dispute, whether it's a banking dispute or a family dispute, I do civil and commercial and family, yeah.
I think that's probably true. Often I finally say, if nothing else, you will never have to see these people again. You will never have to appear again. And that seems to get another few bucks or whatever it is out of people, I admit. That's sort of saying the loss that's being imposed by this dispute will end, and you can focus on something else. Yeah, okay. Any other examples? Things?
In my case, is there's an inherent value in just closing the book on a claim, you know.
Oh, yes. Essentially, let's say for an insurer for whom a claim is a continuing expense, and maybe others. Okay.
If you can get a mediation in real quick in a business dispute, it can help, because there's that old principal agent problem. You know, the mid-level person who wants to be on the beach in the island of Bikini, having not disclosed his heir. But if you can get the dispute makers in early, get them to lunch, talk about it, sometimes you can repair before big damage has been done.
Staunch the loss or minimize the loss. Yep.
It would be interesting to consider Kahneman's prospect theory here, which is measuring gain and loss. It seems to address the same sort of issues.
I should have said that. Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize in economics for essentially, he and Tversky, but Tversky passed away, for essentially demonstrating that human beings don't make rational economic decisions. They're driven by exactly what I showed you. And we've learned that I think, applies equally to making decisions about settlement. But yes, Daniel Kahneman is the one who taught us all about this, or at least those of us who hadn't known. So now let me go deeper into the psychology. Where parent may occur just by, okay. Well, I could respond to all of the interesting chat messages, but I'll let them go on. The psychology of loss, starting with Sigmund Freud. I'm not a Freudian, but I found he had some useful things to say. And here's what he said back in World War I, Vienna. Sigmund Freud, Mourning and Melancholia. Victims of completely personal losses and illness, the death of a loved one in a shipwreck, perpetually, he said, claim injustice. Their complaints, he said, are remarkably like what legal plaints were like in 100 years ago in Vienna. And he said, adjusting to these purely personal losses involves what he called a painful compromise in people's minds between wish and reality. And as the victim mourns, they were essentially going through a negotiation inside their head between what the wish to deny the loss and the knowledge that, in fact, the loss has occurred. How does this apply to what we do? Well, parties, I think, who suffer loss feel often a need to mourn it. And as it happens, there's a similar negotiation going on in their minds between what they wish would be true and what either the trial or settlement would result in. So when we're in settlement discussions, there's sometimes two negotiations going on. You've got conventional bargaining, which we're doing or helping with across the table. And then you've got in the mind of one party or lawyer, an internal negotiation that the lawyer, the mediator, maybe even the party themselves are just not aware of. And that, at the minimum, greatly confuses things. And what I find complicates it is parties are willing to reveal anything that supports their legal position or strong emotions like anger or frustration, but they tend to deny, conceal anything that feels vulnerable. They arrive with game faces on, and you have a sense they're acting out feelings, of course, instead of admitting them. And I got a sense of this by did a seminar for claims adjusters for serious accidents. And they talked about how they felt about emotion. So here are the comments of two claims adjusters. One of them says, sometimes I feel so bad about what happened to these victims. It's just so awful. Then other times I think they're just roadkill. Roadkill. Okay, that's the sensitive adjuster. The less sensitive adjuster comes up to me and says, professor, very interesting, very interesting. When they call you professor, you always worry. But I got this business card. He gave me a business card. I keep it under my blotter just to remind myself. Here is the business card. Your story has touched my heart. Never before have I met anyone with more troubles than you have. Please accept this expression of my sincere sympathy. Now, blank, and quit bothering me. Except his wasn't whited out. So, you know, this is what people are doing and thinking. And of course, it gets acted out. So now I want to go one layer deeper and then get some reactions. The layer deeper is this. So-called delayed grief, or what I call a loss reaction. And again, Freud and other psychologists have identified this. Freud said, look, some victims of personal loss, he finds, construct a fantasy in which the loss hasn't occurred. Their brother-in-law, who is in a shipwreck, is on a desert island. When 400 people were killed in the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, some people for months or years believed that their relative had gotten out and was somehow wandering with amnesia among New England towns. So they deny. And as long as it lasts, they don't feel much of the loss. But at some point, the fantasy collapses. They feel all the grief they'd avoided before. How does this apply in legal disputes? Well, some litigants, I find, focus on their legal claim that I'll be reinstated, I'll have back pay, I'll be vindicated. And as long as they're thinking that, they're not feeling all of the sadness that goes with what has happened. And then sometime, and it's when they have to make a major concession at between, I find, 3 and 6 p.m. in a mediation, that they suddenly feel all the loss that they've been avoiding. When that happens, I find, things happened that were described by people beginning with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? The 5 stages of grieving: anger, denial, unrealistic bargaining, depression, and then in the end, acceptance. John Bowlby talked about numbing, yearning, anger, disorganization and despair, and a refusal to see data through what he called amnesia or selective exclusion, which sounds a lot like selective perception that we talk about. My wife, a psychologist, says, look, underneath all that anger and denial is often fear of what's going to happen if they settle or if they don't. And often, she said, the reactions vary greatly. They don't march through 5 stages. They may be in different order, stages may disappear, or they vacillate back and forth. Like they go to acceptance and then some anger and denial pops up. All right, if all this is sort of going on when people are, as I find it, in the mid-late afternoon, evening, maybe, not so much anymore, feeling this, what does it mean for us as mediators? No, one other thing. Sometimes people feel that settling on any the case itself has taken on a meaning, so settling on any terms feels like a loss. And this was caught to me by a victim, the widow of a victim of 9/11, who had been offered what she agreed was a fair settlement. But here's what she said: it's hard. There's a finality about it. When we sign, it's done. He's really gone. Before she saw, I mean, she knew her husband was dead, and yet. So I see that in cases where people just won't let go of the case because it's acquired. I remember a family dispute where the fight for business, a $10 million judgment by the kids against the parents. The kids had told their kids, the grandchildren, their grandparents were dead. And as we settled it, finally, I couldn't get the grandmother to sign off on the agreement. And I realized the lawsuit was her only way of connecting with her family. Otherwise, it was gone. And you might say, what a miserable way to connect, but there it was. So
Dwight, I see this so often. Dwight, I see this so often in employment cases when a plaintiff has to realize they're not getting the job back. They really have to move on in their lives and careers.
There's that, and then that implicates anything about employment, I think, implicates identity and affiliation and all those things about, Dan Shapiro was talking about. Yes, especially in employment. Though I did a seminar in Kentucky, and a woman said that she's a bankruptcy lawyer, and she said for her it was when the woman had to take off her wedding ring and put it on the table as part of giving up assets. She said for guys it was more when they put the keys to their bike on the table. But there you are. So it happens, I think, in all kinds of contexts, although most, I think, in family cases and employment, because it cuts so close to the bone in terms of feelings.
To Jeff's point, I often see plaintiffs just want to make sure that the employer has heard them and is feeling remorse and feeling badly about what they did. And I have to tell them, look, no money that they wanted to put on is what they wanted to pay. So the fact they're even here is something. It's an acknowledgement. So even whether it's 100,000 or 400,000, they are hearing you and they've heard you. So sometimes that helps.
You're characterizing that as an acknowledgement that they've heard you, and yes, all this is true. Well, now I go to my suggestions for dealing with it, and honestly, they're not as good as my diagnosis, but it's all I've got. So let me give them to you and see what you think. Well, first, what are the issues here? Well, one, they're really intense. You can tell how intense these things are, and you've experienced them. The timing is bad, right? It doesn't happen at the beginning when they're often there, I'm asking for $1 zillion, I'm offering 1,000. It's late when they realize they have to make big compromises. They won't get their job back. They won't get all their back pay and all that. At this point, parties are tired and impatient. I have to admit that I myself sort of feel like I'm looking for a deal now. We had the feelings in the morning, that phase is over. Now can we just get a deal? And I'm just not as sympathetic and open as I think I ought to be. The third problem is the people who are feeling this often act like nasty unethical bargainers because they're angry, so they make insulting comments. They're in denial, so they stonewall. They can't make decisions because they're depressed, or these recurrent feelings are going back, which leads to a reneging, and I can give you examples of that. And nothing drives the other side crazy like some of this stuff. And there it is, you know. Now, my feelings about, or my views about what one could do about it. Well, have you seen this in your cases? And I'm hearing, let me see if I can get one more or two more examples. Has anybody seen anything like this happening in their cases? Is this
Yes,
just
I have.
what
I
kind of
have-
case?
Well, it was a commercial case, and contracts between various three different businesses. So I was negotiating all together for the different ones. Same mediation, not in the same room. And I had the deal done. So I go back into room number 2 and tell them what everybody is going to be paying, receiving,
Right.
etc. And the gentleman the client just blew up because he wanted more money back. He was getting money. And if the person in room 1 was getting the money he was getting, then they should pay it to the person in room 2. And so needless to say, we had to go back to the drawing room, so to speak. And that took about an extra hour to finish it up.
Yeah. People can make themselves very unlikable during the process of advocating them for their best interest.
Because they're in the grip of this this negotiation going on in their mind, or the vacillation, and it's we're none of our best, but we see people at something approaching their worst at times.
But
so
this gentleman, I totally understood it then, especially after I thought about it some more after the fact. I could totally understand why he was doing what he was doing, but
it can bias the media. It can bias the mediator too. I know. I just wrote an article on this exact subject. Your own as a mediator, you have biases too, and you got to figure out what to do with them.
Yeah, I say one great advantage maybe of Zoom mediation is I see myself, and I can see myself not being the wonderful, understanding mediator I want to be, especially when I'm getting annoyed with people because they're not playing the game that I thought they were going to play or something. So let me give you a couple of thoughts, and if we have time, I'm going to show you 2 minutes of a mediator using loss to get a deal. Well, I think it's really helpful to just realize what's happening. It makes me less likely to be annoyed with them because this isn't intentional. They're not themselves. They're not under control. Listening, though that means I sometimes have to adjourn mediations. We could have a separate seminar on the fact that I'm not seeing mediation settle anywhere near like they used to the same day. I would think you need to delay before you use conventional techniques like reframing. Let's look at it another way. Here's some advice. I think at some level, I wasn't trained as a grief counselor. I had no wish to be a grief counselor, but I find myself almost conducting a wake or a funeral for what they've lost. And I'm sure my wife or many other people could do it better, but I'm the one who's there, and I'm the one they'll talk to. And sometimes we adjourn, and I've even had people come over to my house with the assent of their lawyers to just talk through what has happened. Very rarely, but it happens. So those are my suggestions.
Just like to say that what it gets in the way is issues of right and wrong and fair and not fair. And these can be very stuck in people's heads. And that is something we have to work with. You know, they come in and they know they're right. They know what's fair, etc.
So then that's a loss if the process isn't recognizing what's fair or
then
what's
right. Then it's not fair. If they don't get what they want, it's not.
You got it. Now, one last thing, and then I'm done with my PowerPoints. I think we have to protect the bargaining process while this stuff is going on. To me, obviously, the angry, unhelpful stuff that happens in caucuses, and I see as the major benefit of caucusing, you can filter out, translate, reframe to get the sting out. I think it's important to explain to the other side what's going on. They're having a lot of trouble with this. You got to understand they're really upset, which actually the other side kind of likes because it indicates I must be getting a good bargain. But explaining to them what's going on, and we just need some time. I found people are very understanding of that. And sometimes I find the one-day model is less and less useful to me, and I need to pause. I need to adjourn. So those are my thoughts. Someone asked, are they available?
But I have a question.
Who can send them to whoever. Yeah, sure.
But I have a question. When you want to explain to side 2 what's going on with side 1, I often find myself asking, well, what are the bounds of confidentiality, and what can I describe about my impressions, which perhaps might not be confidential, without disclosing the verbatim what is said, which I think almost certainly is confidential. How do you draw that demarcation in your own mind?
Well, first, you could have a seminar about confidentiality and the fact that people talk about confidentiality, but at the same time, we're supposed to be conveying information back and forth. And my colleague Eric Green calls this fuzzy confidentiality, that he somehow has some kind of implied permission to disclose some things sometimes, but not others, and it's very uncertain. I guess the question is, would someone be willing to let me say this about them in this room, or would they think I was hurting them or their bargaining position? If I'm hurting them or their bargaining, I'd need extraordinary reasons to disclose it. I thought they both were pulling the roof down on themselves, and I had to stop the roof from coming down. But often saying someone is in serious difficulty or having a lot of trouble, that's actually suggests why they're not likely to compromise. So I don't think people have much trouble with me saying that. In fact, they often tell me they're having trouble. So I guess it might depend on how you say it. Sorry, Anne?
No, I was just going to say in response to Jeff, boy, it's a tough one, Jeff. And because of confidentiality, I frequently check with parties like, all right, we're getting, let's say, hopefully maybe to some kind of drafting of some issues. I believe I heard you say this, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've written this down. And Dwight, you're right. I love Zoom mediations. And I believe this is what you've said. May I share that with the other party?
Well, that's fine.
Yeah,
but what Jeff's asking
about is something quite else, giving the impression, sometimes saying things like, I really believe that they are making, a real effort here to make a best offer, something like that. And you're right, got to be a little bit.
I don't know. I heard Jeff say something different, even worse, which is, what if you're asked to say that they're having trouble? Not that they're doing their best, but that they're doing their worst, sort of, and why? I think that to me is harder. But again, there are things I think you can say, and you just want them to have a sense. I mainly want them to know it's not intentional, bad faith, unethical bargaining, nasty, etc., gratuitous nastiness. Jeff, I could either show 2 minutes of Marjorie Aaron using loss to convince the party I showed you earlier to settle, or get more reactions. Which should I do? We got 4 minutes left.
It's always a treat to see Marjorie. So why don't we learn from
All right, 2 minutes, and then we got 2 minutes to still talk, hopefully.
Okay,
let me see. Using loss aversion.
Let me report to you on progress, okay? Any deal that we've been talking about for a long time included a non-exclusive arrangement for you to continue to sell oximeters and probes, okay?
So they've been offered, they can't have an exclusive, but MedPro would give them a non-exclusive, which she's been holding out, of course, as an interest-based gain.
So they were at 150 with that non-exclusive arrangement. I came back to you and you said that's not enough. You were at 500, right? With the non-exclusive.
Right.
I went back to them and what they said was they'll go up to 165 with the non-exclusive. But if they're going to go higher than that, they'll take the non-exclusive off the table.
So right now we have a door A or a door B from them. Is that right?
That would be a way of looking at it. They're saying, yes, they would take the non-exclusive part of it off the table if you're pushing them that hard on the cash. Yeah.
But I mean, that hurts them as well. You know, if they're not going to be selling in India anymore, I mean, I think that they're just doing this out of spite. It's not really negotiation at this point.
For them, you know, if they don't give you the non-exclusive, they don't have too many people in India selling the product. So it seems strange, right? That why would a business person say no?
Well, also, they've benefited tremendously from the goodwill that Ms. Gandhi has generated.
Right.
In the relevant business community.
I understand that. And they are business people, and you would think that business people would be rational and want to go with a deal that has their best agents, really.
Exactly.
Okay, so here's the problem. They're getting frustrated, and they are feeling pushed, and they are just saying at some point it's over some point in money. And this point right now, they're saying it's 165. They just don't want to do it anymore.
Okay, let's stop. So you can see what she's doing. She's using the threat of once you have something on the table, it might come off the table. And I've seen mediators intentionally, essentially put items that are on the table in people's pockets and get them used to having it. And it's sort of, they got that. And then if it starts being pulled away, loss aversion works to persuade people to settle, I guess I'd say. Well, with all of that, it's into a area that we don't talk about much, and I hope it's been helpful to think about it a little bit and see what psychologists have said about it over 100 years. And I guess with that, I'll turn it back to Jeff and Jean, and thank you.
Dwight, thank you. This was a wonderful presentation. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback in the chat, and some people have already contributed to the Greater Boston Food Bank in your honor. And we encourage people to do so if they're in a position to do so. It's www.gbfb.org. That's www.gbfb.org. Dwight, again, a wonderful
presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, my friends, we are complete.
Okay, thank you. And it's great to be together.
Thank you all so much. And if you'd be so kind as to let Jeff or myself or Natalie Armstrong-Motin know about any donation that you might make, that would be wonderful. We'd love to add it to that running total. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.